Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our final Reuters Forum of the year. It's hard to believe that the year is over already, but I'm glad to see that a few of you were able to make it out for our 7th panel. Tonight's topic is Big Brother Meets Big Business, the Future of Civil Liberties in an Unsafe World. And I know 6 debates have been fabulous, but I've saved the best for last, so I'm glad you're all here. I want to also congratulate my class. The students of the Reuters Forum have published, they've launched their issue of the Reuters Forum Journal, and next year when you all come back, you're invited to pick up a copy. These are preview copies. We don't have enough to pass out to everyone, but I want to congratulate the students and also remind those students who have to take to the mic tonight that this is your last chance. Make it to the mic before the night is over. I'm going to introduce our moderator who will be introducing the rest of our panel. But before I do that, I do want to thank you all for your loyal attendance this semester and invite you back in January 2003. I am told we will have another Reuters Forum for you. Tonight we have a standing moderator, or I guess Bob's been here 4 years at least, and he's always a favorite, so that's another reason why I've saved him for last. Bob Kuttner is founder and co-editor of the American Prospect. He's a prolific writer. I'm sure you've seen his byline in many publications, including Business Week and the Boston Globe, the New Republic, and his book, Everything for Sale, which was in 1997 named winner of the Sidney Hillman Award. That was a book that for many years I've recommended that you read, and it's still worth reading. So without taking any more of tonight's time, I am going to turn the proceedings over to Bob Kuttner.
Thank you. Well, we have been doing a little dry run in the green room, as it were, and I think you're in for a treat. Maybe a treat makes it sound frivolous because this is such a weighty topic. Big Brother meets Big Business, the future of civil liberties in an unsafe world. What could that mean? Well, I think since September 11, and even before September 11, we've had the intersection of several unsettling trends. This is a country whose first national motto was "Don't tread on me." This is a very liberty-loving country. Liberals and conservatives don't agree on very much, but one thing they agree on is that they don't like Big Brother. And Big Brother these days comes both in the form of the public sector and in the form of the private sector. All kinds of new technologies allow the creation of databases that have commercial purposes that go beyond the purpose for which the data was collected. And the issue of how we safeguard our privacy from the misuse of medical databases or financial databases or credit databases has been lurking for 20 or 30 years. And there was a spate of consumer legislation in the 70s designed to protect against the misuse of data. And there really has not been much consumer legislation since then because regulation is out of fashion. So the assault on privacy by business is one set of issues. But then, of course, if you look at terrorism, that set of concerns sometimes seems like a mere nuisance compared to the set of concerns that have to do with how you reconcile your liberty as an American with your security as an American. And after September 11th happened, we at the American Prospect agonized about how does a self-consciously liberal magazine address this set of concerns, and we ended up with a special issue called Defending an Open Society. That's the challenge. How do you value what is uniquely American, that we are more open than most societies, when the very security of the society is under assault? How do you square that circle? And of course, business and government come together in the development of surveillance technologies, the CIA investing almost as a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley for purposes of making us more secure, in a way that strikes some people as making us less free. That's the subject of tonight's panel, and we really have three quite extraordinary people to begin the discussion. Jeff Wharton is a man with a distinguished record in many facets of real estate, and in June 2001, he became managing director for the World Trade Center. So he has lived this in a very deeply personal way. Jerry Berman is the executive director of the Center for Democracy and Technology, probably the leading civil libertarian in the field of how you reconcile an internet society with a free society. And Ira Jackson is the director and faculty chair of the Center for Business and Government at Harvard's Kennedy School. Before that was a senior executive of Bank Boston and has served in a variety of government and private sector posts. And judging by the little preview that we gave each other, this is going to be a very interesting discussion. So to begin, Jeff Wharton.
Good evening. As the introduction said, we previewed what we were going to say. And based upon that, I'm taking my prepared remarks and I'm going to put them over here. And if you'll indulge me, let me explain to you why I'm here. And let me see if I can help frame the issue for tonight's discussion. I think I'm here because I was one of the people who was in the Trade Center on 9/11. I'm one of 4 people who survived being in that restaurant and Windows in the World of the morning of the attack. And so I've lived through the experience of that day and the horror of the day and struggled with the issues before 9/11 of how to provide a secure environment with all the civil liberties issues, and struggle with it to this day. And you know, when we did this, was it a month ago, at Reuters, I said that if we were doing this seminar a year ago, and Tom Friedman were here, we would be talking about his theory that there are no 2 countries in the world that have McDonald's that are ever at war with each other, and we've talked about globalization and all the benefits of an integrated world, that was getting smaller all of the time, and the joys and the benefits of technology. And a year later, when we have an asymmetrical war and a low-tech war where we have human bombs, the conversation is very different. And let me see if I can give you some context and bring you up to today and help frame the issue. The first time that we faced state-sponsored terrorism in this country and that affected how we lived, and particularly real estate, was during the Gulf War. And the buildings that I was responsible for managing, our response was to seal the buildings, to use dogs on the perimeters, and to control access on a very regulated basis. What was interesting is, as the war ended and the threat receded, all of our tenants asked that we reduce the security totally and remove all of the obstacles to make the buildings transparent to them, which we did. The next time I faced it was in '96 when our company bought Rockefeller Center, and I was the managing partner of that venture and responsible for its operations and for its security, and looked at the same kinds of issues. I mean, we were a target, but not. I didn't think of it in terms of terrorism as such, but more in terms of street crimes and other issues that affect people. And we had a very transparent and open environment, except we also had 180 cameras monitoring the environment, and we did provide security for the 150,000 people who were our guests at the Christmas tree, and we did provide a deluge system, lest you worry if somebody tried to burn the tree down, to put out the fire. But most of what we did was, again, provide a high degree of transparency for the center, because people had told us that that's what they wanted. They were prepared to be in a less secure environment to have the transparency. And in the interim, I'm going to tell you, I was also a commuter to Germany. I went every other week for 2.5 years to involve myself in a project, one in Berlin and one in Frankfurt. And there we used turnstiles as a way of regulating access. But again, it was a very transparent system. So let me bring you up to June of this year, where the contract was signed to privatize the Trade Center and to turn it over to private hands. And part of that process is really very interesting. I was allowed to read but not take notes on or remove a security assessment that was done after the '93 bombing. And what the assessment really, the premise of it was, is that people who would wish us ill and would harm us are really afraid to identify themselves. So if you provide a system where you screen people going to a building, you provide a high level of security. And the system that was evolved at significant cost was a series, I'm sure you've seen things like this, you use things like this. This is an identity card that was issued with my photograph on the front and a barcode on the back. And there were a series of turnstiles in the Trade Center. You came in and you swiped your card through and you were allowed access to the building. Now, let me explain to you. When it was given to me, they gave me a gift of a wallet. So you could take the card, you put it in the wallet, you go to the turnstile, you place it on the turnstile, and you walk in the building. Everybody had to be photographed. Everybody had to walk in. Everybody had to have this. So you put it in the wallet, you walk in, and that's how security was provided. Now, a lot of people were very offended they had to have their pictures taken and had to have a card. But the truth is, there's an illusion of safety, and the premise of it, and what I think we talk about, is people felt if you had your photograph taken and you put it on a card, chances are you were not going to do harm to the building or its occupants. I don't know about you, but I found that somewhat preposterous, and I said to people that if you look at the world we live in, where people elsewhere in the world were prepared to give up their life to cause harm, I didn't understand why our oceans and our borders protected us from that risk. And so unlike some of the theoretical things we discussed, I had the practical responsibility of providing security for 50,000 people and the people in that building on that day in the real world. And so we started to explore the issue, and I explored it with somebody who became dear to me who lost his life on that morning, whose name is John O'Neill, who was a leading terrorist expert in the FBI and probably the only person in the FBI who had tracked Osama bin Laden. And what he said to me as we built up to the closing and the transfer of control from the Port Authority to private ownership is, anybody who believes that this country is not at risk to terrorism is living in a fool's paradise. And anybody who doesn't understand that buildings such as the World Trade Center are terrorist targets is delusional. And the only way we're going to protect it is provide real security, and that means that we're going to have to address some of the issues of people permitting themselves to be inconvenienced and to be screened in a way that we can provide meaningful protection to people who are resident in that building and to provide a cordon of security around it, with all the issues that are attendant to doing that. It is, we started to explore it, and I'm very interested and wanted to participate in the panel to understand some of the issues because we never finished the conversation. We're trying to do it now as we rebuild the center, but we didn't finish the conversation on that day. What we did think about was the more we wanted to provide a secure environment, the more we had to invade people's privacy. I mean, the card that I showed you has a barcode on it. Once you walk in, I am now known to the people in the building, and they now have whatever information they have on my coming and going. What's interesting, the tenants were willing to tolerate a card which allowed them to enter the building, but they would not tolerate a card that had to be swiped to exit the building. Which means you could walk in the building, you could spend a day, a week, and a month there, do whatever you want to do, and nobody knew when you ever left it. I mean, just think about it. People were not prepared to tolerate that. So we had a system that was basically, it gave the impression of deterrence. And let me tell you what it meant to me. I thought about this last night. It had not occurred to me. It made people who are, like everybody in this room, or I hope everybody in this room, people who were not a threat to the building, feel that there was security. But there was nobody who was a threat who felt insecure from the system because they knew what we know. They were prepared to give their lives up. So having the picture was a good thing to do. It wasn't a bad thing to do. So everybody walked in feeling, look, isn't this wonderful? We have this system, which was costing us $16 million a year, that was providing security for nobody. So we started thinking about things. Do you now have, for example, a fingerprint so that we could identify the person and immediately run it through high-speed computers to identify, so we know who was entering the building? Do you use an iris scan, which is as good as a fingerprint, so that you can do the same thing in a way that people think is less intrusive? Do you use photography, such as the They were using it at the Super Bowl, where you scan an image, and that image is also run through a system. All these issues, started to come to the forefront, with all of the issues that our panelists, I think, are better equipped to discuss than I am, but were very troubling. And the other issue was, who did we think we were screening on those days? The issue that we had to face was whether or not we were going to now inadvertently profile people in a way that was is just unacceptable and repugnant to all of us, but in a way that the system may have operated in culling out people who may be perceived to have been a risk to the building. Now, we did this leading up to the events of the 11th of September. And I suspect we're all here because that day changed everybody's lives and their perceptions. And what would be interesting to me to get out of the evening for myself is how much people are prepared to tolerate some intrusion and inconvenience in their lives to provide a higher level of safety and security in buildings. Now, as the physical environment, we have gone through an interesting process. We have worked with security consultants on a threat assessment, some based upon the Muir building in Oklahoma, some based on the Trade Center, some based on other incidents. We have engaged the University of Illinois to do for us a comprehensive review of what they've learned, including people who are very much involved in Israel, who have analyzed 300 attacks or 3,000 attacks on buildings to understand how a building performs in that incident. And what I wanted to just, without frightening you, but to frame the issue in a way that I think is real. The good news, and I mean this in an objective sense, not any other way. The good news of the 11th of September is the attack was high in the building, which meant 90% of the people below that building were able to escape because the damage and the insult to the building was above them. Most of the incidents that occur around the world are on the bottom of the building. Much different issue, much different threat, and in some ways a lot more horrific in terms of loss of life and people's conditions. We can solve some of those problems to make a building more secure from that at a financial cost. Based upon 7 World Trade Center, which we're now in the process of rebuilding, the groundbreaking, the actual starting construction was this morning, we are studying things you can do to harden the building, to provide more secure exiting, all of these issues. And the cost is real. We're estimating it's somewhere between $10 and $15 million to a building of about 1.5 million feet. It means $1 a foot in rent. It means a tenant coming has to pay a premium for a building which is safer and more secure. Not perfect, safer and more secure. This is, to me, I was saying to my wife last night, it's like people saying before you put seatbelts in cars, if I drive safely and I drive a big enough car, why do I need this? Well, it's more expensive and it's physically intrusive. I have to strap myself in. The answer is, as a society, do we want to pay the cost to provide a more safe environment? Do we want to suffer the inconvenience and time? And as I hope our panelists explore, are we prepared to give up some degree of our personal liberties to allow people who are trying to provide a safe and secure environment enough information to secure the building? That's what we struggled with before the 11th, and that's what I have struggled with every day since then, to be able to do it. And the question is whether or not this is commercially feasible, whether tenants will tolerate it, whether people in the building will feel safe and secure. I think it's something we don't know. I just leave you with one thought before I turn it over. I was watching CNN on the treadmill this morning, and the first reports out of Israel were of that awful attack that occurred last night. And the thing that just absolutely has upset me all day was the reporter said people felt safe and secure because they were on the 3rd floor of a building. And the attacks to this point had always been on the 1st floor of a building. So here you are in a country that has suffered insult after insult, attack after attack. And in that culture, people had made themselves feel emotionally, if I'm not on the 1st floor, I'm not at risk. And what this morning told me was what the 11th of September told me, is that you are at risk in this world, wherever you are, until we root the problem out. And until, from my point of view, we're prepared to accept the cost in terms of our civil liberties and the cost of doing it, we are being delusional to ourselves. And for my vote on this, I would err on the side of providing a more safe and secure environment and trust ourselves and our people and our heritage to protect ourselves against the intrusions on our liberties. So, thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ira Jackson.
Thanks, Bob, and thank you, Jeff. Let me begin with just some observations and then move to some recommendations, or at least some suggested action steps that I think we need to take as a society. First, to pick up where Jeff left off, I think undeniably 9/11 changed everything, just changed everything. The world is different and will never be the same. Pandora's box is open widely on the issues that we're addressing tonight, so I think it's timely and appropriate to stop, assess, recalibrate some traditional and conventional assumptions about privacy, the need for integrated data collection and analysis, security, freedom, and even the future of capitalism as we know it. Secondly, while 9/11 accelerates change and precludes putting the genie back in the bottle, it's worth reflecting that changes were well underway before 9/11 that should have forced a greater national discussion about security, vulnerabilities, and threats to privacy. It seems to me we really didn't focus adequately as a society on these trends before, and that it would be a major mistake if we fail to address them forthrightly now. Third, nobody should be intimidated into silence or endlessly defer to experts on this subject. If war is too important to be left to the generals, then a war on terrorism and discussion about national identity cards or facial recognition systems shouldn't be left to the government or Governor Ridge or Attorney General Ashcroft or the Joint Chiefs of Staff or Larry Ellison alone. This is a conversation that speaks to fundamental issues of security and freedom, and it would be unpatriotic not to engage in a vigorous exploration and debate about these issues. Fourth, if the vigilance associated with 9/11 recedes, and I for one hope that it doesn't, because complacency has already led to national trauma, and resumed complacency will only, I fear, lead to national tragedy. Even if vigilance recedes, the underlying trend of data collection and analysis by both business and government will not. These trains have left the station. The question for society is whether we choose as a society to make sure that the train has a conductor and that someone responsible is at the switch. Fifth, technology is way ahead of government or society or even businesses' understanding of that technology, its implications, or its potential consequences. This again, and to repeat, is accelerating irrespective of 9/11 or the war on terrorism. So we're faced with a misalignment. Society and certainly government is incapable of fully understanding technology or its consequences. In the context of a genuine national and international crisis, we're desperately trying to harness that technology to combat genuine and palpable threats. But in the process, we may be accelerating the distance that divides our understanding and control of technology with the reach and unintended consequences of its application. I don't mean to trivialize, especially after Jeff's moving words, but perhaps a constructive way of illustrating the dilemma is to remind ourselves of one of the many lessons of Enron, and that is that the business that Enron eventually became was basically unmanageable, even by the people who created it. Managers couldn't manage, auditors couldn't detect, boards couldn't understand, analysts couldn't assess risks, and government couldn't regulate. It's a sobering and cautionary tale with many lessons. Some might be relevant for discussion and debate tonight. One is that we know less than we think we know. Secondly, it's vitally important to continuously raise questions that clarify our understanding. And thirdly, in areas of uncertainty, especially where developments outpace comprehension, government must play a stronger and more assertive, not a weaker or more compliant role. Government may not be adequately sophisticated, but it's our last best hope for ensuring that rules are established and are fairly and vigorously enforced. Okay, so where does that leave us in terms of big brother and big business, privacy, security, and the war on terrorism? Let me conclude with 5 observations. First, in my opinion, we clearly need to employ more and better information-based technology, especially in terms of coordination between federal, state, and local law enforcement, and first responder networks such as hospitals and the CDC. Let's be honest about this. Government is way behind the market in doing this right, and it needs to catch up fast. This isn't a question of more big brother, but of a more competent, less Keystone Cop government, one that we desperately need. Either we get this right, not just at airports or at train stations and border crossings, but at seaports where 12 million containers come and go every year. Either we get this right, or the next Muhammad Atta will do us wrong, next time with likely much more lethal and devastating consequences. Second, the rules that govern the new networks need to be explicit and much more transparent. Government needs to set and enforce these rules, and we need to avoid carving out any regulatory black holes similar to what Enron deliberately engineered for itself. The chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Government and regulators need to check its strength, test its vulnerabilities, and safeguard its compliance with the rules that society sets through its government. Third, I don't think we should bash the Larry Ellisons of the business world. We desperately need their talent and technology. Let's encourage more, not fewer of them, to take a place at the table. It's the ingenuity that's found largely in the private sector, not in government, that holds the key to technological innovations that may overcome some of the most devious, clever, and certainly lethal threats the world has ever countenanced. Let's not shoot the medium or the messenger. Ellison, Gerstner, Welch, Gates, let's encourage them rather than heap them with scorn. As I recall, the 9/11 attack might have been thwarted if our government hadn't been constructed into hardened bureaucratic silos. Well, people in the private sector know how to overcome these silos and make things work. Fourth, Orwellian visions should have been worrying us long ago, probably even well before 1984, which was 18 years ago. It's too late to put the horse back in the barn, but we need to construct a new corral that contains the capacities that we need with the privacy and protections that we want. And we, as Americans, of course, want it all, but we can also lose it all. This is hard work, and we need to get on with it rather than spending too much time lamenting the world that never was. Finally, I mentioned in passing that 9/11 changes, or should have changed, everything, including capitalism. Well, the future of capitalism is referred to in the flyer about this panel. The questions I was sent in advance didn't return to the topic. Let me use my last 60 seconds to do so. Because one of the big lessons of 9/11, in my opinion, is that business and capitalism itself needs to also change and recalibrate some of its most basic assumptions. In a word, I believe we need a new capitalism, one that's driven by purpose as well as profits, one that provides value for society as well as value for shareholders. The new capitalism won't alone bring peace to the Middle East or wipe out Al-Qaeda, but a new capitalism that extends economic opportunity to some of the 4 billion marginalized people in this world who don't participate in the economic mainstream as we know it. This kind of capitalism with a conscience and a purpose can go a long way to making people feel that there are dreams worth pursuing beyond martyrdom, fundamentalism, or fanaticism. So to be provocative, I'll end with the assertion that despite the dangers, what's needed most right now is not less big government, but smarter big government. Not less big business, but more principled big business. And without smarter, better, and more ethical government and business, the freedoms and the Fourth Amendment rights we're also concerned about may be put in a lot greater jeopardy than if big government and big business fail to step up to the plate. Thank you.
Jerry Berman.
Thank you. It's for inviting me, and it is a pleasure to be here. Of course, we have a significant problem of terrorism that needs to be addressed. And we need more efficient government, and we need a better government, and everyone should step up to the plate. I do not find that provocative. I find that commonsensical. The issue for us is whether, since 9/11, the question has been posed whether, in order to take on terrorism, and to thwart it and to investigate it, we have to give up our open society or our privacy rights. The previous speaker pointed that, the horse is out of the barn. Let me just take you back to the day before 9/11 happened. The debate in this country and the polls and the facts were that privacy was in significant jeopardy because of several things. High technology. We are living in a networked world. In order to do business, in order to live our lives, we have to turn over more and more information to the private sector and to government. They have vast databases on us. And the debate before 9/11, and it's beginning again, is how do you strike a balance between efficient business and the ability of commerce to succeed, but also our rights to know what information is being collected about us, how it's being held, who it's being disclosed to, and for what purposes. It ought to be transparent to the consumer. That does not seem to, and I don't think making it transparent to the consumer stands in the way of the war on terrorism. The argument that we may have to give up some of our privacy at the airports, we're all taking off our shoes and going through the 3 lines and standing, and our bags are being checked, and no one's waging a gigantic protest over that because it seems reasonable, and when it's reasonable and it's explained to us, we go along. The issue, however, is when proposals are made which may not be explained, which may take and I want to refer to what happened after 9/11 with respect to government power. The horse was already, I'm going to get this metaphor all backwards, but before 9/11, the government had on the record and stated that it had significant national security power. It has been granted special authority to do intelligence investigations under less than probable cause standards used in a criminal investigation, to keep the information secret, to conduct it with there's a special court that looks at wiretaps in national security cases. There are foreign intelligence surveillance guidelines. The intelligence and law enforcement has operated under a whole set of rules hammered out 20 years ago following the disclosures of Watergate, that something we needed to strengthen our intelligence capability, but we had to strike a balance and get our intelligence agencies to focus not on political beliefs or on lawful activity, but to focus on crime. They had thousands and thousands and thousands of files. It wasn't serving national security. They weren't preventing the weathermen, and they weren't preventing student bombings, and they weren't what they were doing was investigating Vietnam War protesters under very broad and vague authorities that had been granted during the Cold War. It was a whole set of powers that had started out saying prevent terrorism, prevent communism, and ended up investigating Martin Luther King and disrupt a threat to our national security became the disruption of Martin Luther King and the Southern Leadership Civil Rights Conference. Things had gone awry, and there was an effort to set it back straight. But what happened was that the national security was given great power to investigate, and privacy was put in that balance. And in my view, the whole history of legislative efforts and reform efforts has been that you do not trade off privacy and national security. You balance them, because if you don't get it right, you are liable to have over-intrusive investigations which may not be very efficient. You've got files on everyone, but you can't tell. You have so many investigations that the real bad fish get right through the net. And that happened during the Watergate era. And so it is striking that balance. When 9/11 came, law enforcement went to the Hill and said, we need to change all of these laws. We need more access to business records. We need to lower the standard for wiretapping individuals. They had authority to tap terrorists, including U.S. terrorists, suspected terrorists. They had, under surveillance, most of the people that had come into the country, including the person who's now facing trial for taking flying lessons and learning to fly but not to land. They had them under surveillance. The issue wasn't a law that was standing in their way. They just didn't communicate between INS and the FBI and CIA that information. They didn't share it. There is a great bureaucratic battle that goes on between the CIA and FBI, which I don't want to go into too much detail, but there are more bureaucratic struggles between our law enforcement agencies and maybe keystone cop law enforcement than there is a lack of authority to investigate and national security threats. But nevertheless, in 6 weeks, Congress passed and changed the standards for intelligence investigations. They can now conduct criminal investigations under an authority where it's lower than probable cause for a wiretap, and it's secret. It is never disclosed to you, unlike a law enforcement wiretap. And we're not talking about, you got to think about this as a tap of your home, a secret search of your home, a secret search of your residence, a secret search of your business, which is never disclosed. They changed the law on records access, financial, credit, medical, not simply to get access to records of persons suspected of being engaged in terrorist activity, but any record which may be relevant to a terrorist investigation. That, that it's relevant, that's a almost a non-existent standard. And what have they been consciously going after is information not simply of terrorists, but anyone who may be in association with them. They're looking at, if you live in an apartment building, they want the information on everyone in that apartment building. They're doing extensive data mining, which is gathering up a lot of information and trying to make connections for intelligence purposes that they might be able to find that someone on an airplane who looks suspicious, there might be several people from Capitol Hill, and he's from Capitol Hill, and they all ought to be taken off and their shoes taken off and investigated. They're not sure what they're doing, but they have great authority to look at this information. We think that they went far beyond anything that they justified on the record. The simple request that we made as civil libertarians, and I testified 3 times in hearings, was that you go through the process of marking up bills, going through the legislative process, having hearings, having a floor debate, offering amendments. They absolutely short-circuited that process and said that anyone who was in that way or trying to exercise the simple procedures of Congress was aiding and abetting terrorism. And they've said on the record that they were more interested not simply in getting authority, but using this as an occasion to take a whole wish list out of the closet that they wanted to pass, and to pass it now. And I can, and stated on that record, and they want more. From the day of 9/11 to today, there has been no documentation on the record that there is any relationship between the authority on the books at any of it hampered any investigation of any terrorist suspect. They can't point to a rule on the book that said it was too strict and therefore it hampered our hands. They are shifting the blame to privacy laws which are absolutely inadequate and saying that's the problem when it's really a bureaucratic and intelligence failure of mass proportions which they do not want to discuss on the record. We do not have a constitutional right to privacy when it comes to information that's not in your home. The information in banks, in these networks, on the internet, is not covered by a strong privacy regime. It is absolutely up for grabs, and government can have access to it. That is the way it is. So we have already traded our privacy. The question is, we'd like to see more oversight to it to determine whether it has done anything to improve or make more efficient or our intelligence capability, or whether we ought to rewrite that balance. I don't think I've got a prayer of doing that, or civil libertarians right now. And also, by the way, stop the debate over having some simple rules over disclosure about what businesses do with your commercial information. That legislation stopped in its tracks. Business is now off the hook because it's the threat of national security has taken that, and they're happily free, stopping their self-regulatory efforts, stopping advertising that they're really working on your privacy every day, cutting back their budgets for privacy protection and their self-regulatory efforts. That's all being sacrificed. I don't think that's justified. What most troubling is that in granting new powers to our intelligence agencies, to investigate, to collect business records, to conduct wiretaps of anyone who may have quote, unauthorized access to a computer. They did not establish an oversight system so that Congress is systematically looking at what law enforcement is doing about these issues.
Sorry, one minute.
1 minute. There needs to be, we may need a national ID card. We may need new forms of authentication. But you need to have a dialogue between the business community, policymakers, privacy advocates, and the public. And that has to be transparent and open. That does not happen when you pass legislation in the middle of the night. And if you say, I'll give you business records, but the Attorney General says, but no gun records, that's off limits. What's the rationale that's running through we're lacking a rationale. We're lacking any systematic understanding of what they're trying to do in changing the law. I think that the balance has not been struck, and I think we have a lot to debate before we take any further steps to loosen authority or further erode our privacy. And I say that with my major goal, as all of us, to have a more safe and secure society that protects our open values. Thank you.
I think what I'm going to suggest is that before we go to audience questions, I'm going to invite each panelist to ask one question of another panelist and get a little dialogue going on the panel, and then throw it open. Jeff.
Yeah, what struck me when Jerry spoke the most, and I lost count, but what struck me was the constant repetition when we refer to government as they. It's always about they. It's about protecting our rights. And I must tell you that from my own point of view, you know, I remember if you look back at our Constitution and Declaration of Independence, the language is of we. It is we are the people. It is our government. These are our officials. And what troubles me in the remarks is I hope we have not come a point in our history where you believe that the government is they and we are we, and that this isn't a common enterprise where collectively the government, our elected officials, aren't trying to protect this country against a real and credible threat, and that we have the power as a free society and the people who are our representatives to be sensitive to and transparent to the issues of civil liberties. So my question is, do you really believe it is we and they?
No, I do not. But government has a tendency of also saying we and they, and believing that they can make these decisions without a significant public debate and involvement. By the way, because of the way that this was done, the way that this legislation passed, I am driven back to the Bill of Rights. The general clause of the Constitution, we the people, the Commerce Clause, we get down to the bottom of that, but there is also the Bill of Rights, and it was a we, they. And there is a suspicion, and a right suspicion, that runs through American society of unchecked power and government. And that has been a healthy thing in America. And it is a tension that's there in the Bill of Rights. Congress shall make no law. And that is speaking on behalf of the people. I don't distinguish myself from the government. But when many people are not consulted and there's no consultative process, I am a bit unhappy with the way it went down. That's all.
Ira?
Jeff, it struck me listening to you and the poignant tale that you experienced having started the day at the Windows in the World, that you become an instant expert, and that we'd be smart to tap your insights and expertise not only about buildings and building security, but other generic insights that you undoubtedly have formulated about other security vulnerabilities and other smart, intelligent, and non-intrusive steps that we need to take to secure our entire community.
You know, while I was thinking about it, I was saying to myself, you know, the same reason that you say you can't, the Constitution protects us totally. The Supreme Court in our earliest days, you say you also can't cry fire in a theater, you know, when there's no fire. I mean, you just can't do that either. And we have had intrusions on our liberties. I mean, for example, there are laws in our books where people have committed crimes against children. They were identified in the community to protect the community. Whether that's right or wrong, I don't know. But the issue that you raised before is the issue, I think, at the heart of it, that we as a society will have to decide how much we are prepared to give up our freedoms to give us personal safety. And I'll tell you what strikes me every day, that we believe that the worst is behind us. If you ask people outside Lower Manhattan, it's different in Midtown. If you go, you know, to New Jersey, it's better. Our son lives in Phoenix, and it's different there, and people in California. I think there's the beginning to the feeling of a mood that this happened to downtown Manhattan. It happened once. It was horrible. It was awful, but thank God it's behind us, and we are free of it. I personally don't happen to share the view, and what I have spent considerable time, as you mentioned, is trying to, in a very real commercial sense, help to reset the balance, because if you come into my building, I feel a sense of responsibility for your safety, and I would set the line probably further than somebody else would to provide a safe environment. And I'll tell you something. Next time you go to a movie theater and you're in a dark room and there's 500 people there, you tell me how many people in that room you think are carrying a handgun. And I'll bet you, without knowing it, there's 10 to 20% of the people in almost any theater in this country today sitting with a handgun, half of them which are illegal. Now, if you feel safe and secure, that's fine.
Time out. May I respond?
Well, I'm finished. I'm saying to you, there's a question I think that we all have to face that's very real and practical, that I have fought for civil liberties my whole life. But I understand that the world got different for me on the 11th and is different for everybody in this room. And if we're prepared to accept the society, that's fine. If we as a society agree, as a majority, we're prepared to accept that threat to us, I think it's fine. I just think we all need to participate in it, and we need to set the line together.
Jerry?
Let me respond to that. I mean, yesterday, I hope you read the paper. Not only did you have the bombing, and our Attorney General had authorized the Solicitor General to argue in 2 Supreme Court cases that, to reverse the government's position, that the Second Amendment does not guarantee the right of everyone to have a handgun. They now are taking the position the Second Amendment protects that. They really said that you can look at your credit records, but we will not allow you to search the gun owner's database. Get real. Is this government fighting terrorism, or are they being selectively looking at certain things? One of the reasons that there's a lot of big business opposition to a national ID card, I oppose it on privacy grounds, but there is a lot of big business opposition because they rely on foreign workers, foreign software designers, and so on. And so the right wing said no national ID card, and that was taken right off the table. not debated in the Patriot Act.
Well, look, I think we are very schizophrenic as a society. If you are an employer, you can't ask anybody marital status, age, any number of questions. You can't ask. But I'm telling you, and here's where I side with you, if I have that card and I swipe in the building, I know more about that person walking in than a person who employs them. To me, that's utterly bizarre, and I don't get it. I mean, it's the most inconsistent thing in the world to me that I can look at you, want to employ you, can't find out 3 things about you, but I can let you, I can walk in a building and get every bit of information on you just by swiping a card through it. Now, that's where I agree with you. That makes absolutely no sense to me, and if somebody can explain it to me, I'd like them to raise their hand and do it.
Well, I think before we go to the audience, let me take the prerogative of the chair for a moment. I think this really gets to the nub of it, that there are wild inconsistencies in the beliefs that we have as Americans about privacy and security that are somewhat inconsistent with each other. And there are wild inconsistencies in how this particular government is going about trying to protect our security. In some respects, I think going too far. In other respects, as in the Solicitor General's testimony on handguns, not going nearly far enough. I am a card-carrying member of the ACLU, and I am probably in a tiny minority of ACLU members who think it would be a good thing if we had a national ID card, because for me the issue is who has access to the data and how it's utilized rather than whether it's collected, because it's already collected. It's collected if you apply for a driver's license. It's collected if you apply for a passport. It's collected if you apply for a credit card. Your data already reposes in dozens of databases, public sector and private sector. The issue is whether it is to be utilized for certain purposes without a judge signing off on a search warrant. And until recently, I was fairly self-confident in holding that position, that if the government had an adequate set of safeguards, I wasn't afraid of a national ID card. Then I realized that right now the government is John Ashcroft. So with that, and I think, although I very much believe in we the people, just from my personal point of view, John Ashcroft is very much a they. And I think something similar went through the minds of Jefferson when he was fighting for the Bill of Rights. This is a democratic government, and yet police agencies, whether in totalitarian governments or in democratic governments, have this Achilles heel where they tend to view rights as inconveniences and obstacles, and it is very much a balancing. Who would like to have the first question from the audience? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Cindy Schreiber from the Columbia Journalism School. My question is, what is being done now to link government agency databases? And from there, how far away is it from linking those databases to private sector databases like airline passenger lists?
Well, I'll take a shot at it. There is for the last 9 months, under Governor Ridge, there's been an effort to draft a national critical infrastructures strategy, including the idea of a FedNet, where the government would be connect itself all up together and link all of its databases. It's fallen on the ground that no one quite knows how to do it. There's a lot of opposition from government agencies and also from the private sector. There are real turf battles between agencies over information. There are even concerns, for example, if you talk to many of the large corporations, when the government says, we'll come in and protect your computer systems and your networks, they're worried about the vulnerability created by letting the government in, because they have less trust of the government and the Hansons and the ability of them to sell information to a terrorist, that it creates security problems of its own. So it's not clear who's supposed to do which job. Many of a lot of data is distributed databases are available now simply because the internet makes it so, but the internet is a step away, because it's still, a web page doesn't tell you what another web page means, and that technology is being developed by the World Wide Web Consortium, which is doing standards for that. And I think we're several years away from the ability of very transparently for agencies to link these databases together. That's a long answer to say it's not there yet.
Yes.
This question is for Mr. Wharton. My name is Michelle Kedem. I'm a student at Columbia Business School. You mentioned earlier that the current security systems in buildings are mostly a sham and don't provide any safety. You talked a little bit about how at 7 World Trade Center you're building a stronger building. But short of building a stronger building, which obviously we can't do for all the buildings that currently exist, what sacrifices of privacy would even be necessary in order for greater safety to occur?
Or sufficient.
First, let me be clear. I'm not suggesting that everything we're doing is a sham. I mean, that overstates the position. I'm suggesting that today, I think the general trend of thinking is that providing a perception of security will give you a high standard of security.
Right.
And I just challenge the assumption. One thing we are trying to do in terms of the building is to intercept people at the earliest possible moment that we could do harm to a building. Right now, you're in most buildings before anybody challenges who you are and identifies who you are. It's a question of an issue. If you go down, if you're in Midtown in the next few days, walk past the Deutsche Bank building, which is on 52nd between 5th and 6th, and you'll see that they have a table outside the building, because they made a decision that they want to screen people before they enter a building. Most people do the screening inside a building. Most people do the screening in the building to stop you from going upstairs, which says, in effect, that the lobby is at risk, and if somebody wants to do something in the lobby, it's fair game. Now, let me tell you, make it practical, because I think that's what we should deal with. Any man today is wearing a jacket in this audience can carry about 50 pounds of explosives on their person without being detected. A suitcase can carry about 100 pounds, and in wintertime, you could probably carry 100 pounds of explosive in a building without being detected. So the question is, are we prepared, again, to say we want to screen like we do at airports, people who are bringing, either themselves or a package into a building as a way of screening things before they enter a building? It's a decision. Where is the point at which we want to have the place where we do it? And at that point, again, what kind of information do we want on an individual? Do we want to know who you are so we can quickly run a data check? I'll give you an example. At Rockefeller Center during the Christmas season, we had about 800 trucks a day trying to enter the system. And what we had thought about doing was getting a scanner to check license plates, to check it against police records immediately to see if we had a stolen vehicle. Now, we didn't do it for all the practical reasons, but I'd ask you the same question. Do you think it's appropriate, to inconvenience everybody to screen and know who's entering a building, entering the loading dock, has access to it? It's a question of where you want to set the line. And I think we'll decide it collectively, and then we will accept either the benefits or the burdens of what we've done.
My name is Hiroshi Takahashi. I'm a student at Teachers College, Columbia University. This is a question to Mr. Berman. In the wake of last year's anthrax scares, there seems to be a push to give governors and state-level officials vastly expanded powers to rule by decree. I mean, to seize property and may gain access to communications with no need to consult with third parties. And this kind of initiative seems benign enough and certainly well meant, but I think the fear persists that once an emergency is declared, these officials might start wielding dictatorial powers to the detriment of civil liberties. My question is, how can we ensure that these seemingly benign and maybe less obtrusive measures will not be abused?
Well, it is a very significant question because Georgetown University just did a study. There are 20 or more states amending their wiretap statutes and creating anti-terrorism operations of their own, and then every country is also, there is the tendency, whether it's on the merits or not, to duplicate and to copy and say, they got the power, we ought to have the power, and there is a rationale. I mean, things happen at home. There's a lot of discontent always about the unwillingness of the feds to share information with the states, and it's a favorite plot of every detective novel, you know, the battle between FBI agents and the state cops. So there, I do not know of any way except federal preemption of state law, but that's not going to happen in this area. There's just citizens in different states are going to have to watch those statutes. I believe that we're in the middle of it's a wave. And the wave is going to go, and many laws and privacy laws are going to be weakened. The issue right now is it has, except if you're a poor Muslim in the Muslim community, you're in trouble, but these laws tend to be narrowly applied for a while, and then something else happens, and they take on another life of their own. And we haven't, for example, a good political battle in this country over Israel and Palestine and what to do in the Middle East and Iraq that leads to a peace movement, and people, who then is aiding and abetting terrorism, and who's investigating whom, and who's collecting files on whom, I think is a nightmare scenario from a privacy point of view, but it hasn't happened yet. These things don't happen overnight, but the statutory regime, the walls that I think were put up 20 years ago to try and get our investigative agencies not focusing on political activity, but focusing on criminal activity and even serious intelligence investigations. Even if they're doing it today, they have much more discretion sitting on the books that they can exercise, and that's a problem.
Over here.
My name is Akiko Matsuda. I'm a student at here Columbia Journalism School. My question would be Mr. Berman, and I'd like to know what is the media's role when they see the conflict between national security and civil liberties?
It is a very disappointing. I'm very disappointed in the media. They tend to cover what's hot. And if it's conflict, we tried to get the media to cover what changes in the law were being proposed in the Patriot Act, just as a matter of informing the public and having a debate about. It's a very difficult, not that it's easy to understand, but they were more interested in waiting till the law passed, and then suddenly you become a national celebrity. You're on Crossfire, and you're on the NewsHour, and anytime I'm on all those shows, from my point of view, that means we've really taken it. We've really lost something, and we're there to bleed for ratings. And so I don't think the press played a very good reporting role. They did not explain these issues well. They didn't have a very much lead time since the legislation passed in 6 weeks.
Was there any pressure?
Huh?
Why they didn't do a good job?
Well, they would have had to do a lot of work. Beyond sound bites, national security law is not easy, and in fact, the institutional memory of Congress, which I have the gray hair. I was there 20 years ago working on these statutes. It was like going around, there was suddenly a call out for all these geriatric civil liberties advocates and intelligence experts to come back to Congress and explain to them what they were doing, because they didn't know that the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act didn't apply to foreigners. It applied to foreign intelligence connections to Americans in the United States. So it was very hard for Congress to understand that they didn't know why they were acting. And we are producing an analysis now, which we are going to release in January to tell, so that Congress, for the first time, I believe, will find out what they passed.
Let me just interject and ask Ira a question. You're a proponent of civically responsible business-government collaboration. Where is business in this civil liberties national security balance? I mean, it seems to me on the one hand, it's a business opportunity to develop and sell all kinds of new technologies and new equipment to government. On the other hand, business is concerned about its own proprietary commercial secrets not being invaded. On the third hand, business is trying to strike a balance between not terrifying consumers that if you do business with somebody, your privacy is going to be invaded, but on the other hand, being able to exercise commerce. So where is business as an actor?
On all three counts. You answered your own question.
Well, but shed some more light on it.
No, why don't we go back to the kids?
No, let me.
No,
really,
let him.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
There are a lot of the business community sees security as an important procurement opportunity and a chance to, and that's good. I mean, that means that they're exercising their ingenuity to come out and try and develop. I got Larry Ellison of Oracle says, I've got a great ID card idea. The government looked at it and said, not a very good idea, Larry. Go back to the drawing boards. They didn't adopt it. We do need a debate between different proposals. The driver's license people want to turn the driver's license into an ID system. It sounds transparently interesting, except that there are so many just think about when you go down and get your driver's license, how many places you can get them, how many human vulnerabilities are going to be in a state-run system. I don't care. So, it's not going to cost much. You just have to get bribe a few people to put different pictures on different IDs and load it up.
I think, Bob, business...
But business is trying they are working, they come to us and try and engage, and they are trying to build better locks and keys for the infrastructure. They want to improve security. But they also do not want the government to overreach and impose enormous costs of doing business on them.
Ira?
Business historically has distrusted government, just as most Americans have distrusted their government ever since Don't Tread on Me or Live Free or Die. But I think we all noticed, all 285 million Americans, that when the World Trade Center collapsed, no one called Jack Welch or Bill Gates. They were looking for their government. And I think business leaders are looking to their government to take care of national security. And I think most business leaders acknowledge that the pendulum had swung too far. So they want their government to be competent, they want it to be capable, they want it to be proactive, they want it to be technologically competent. And I think they want to help, as most of us want to help our government and our society stave off something that would even be more horrific than 9/11. I think business is not monolithic, just as our nation and its politics is not monolithic. I don't think there's a conspiracy of big business to make a buck here. And I think you're absolutely right that most companies are concerned about having differentiated products that don't put them in the same network and system as everybody else's product. So I think they're about as confused as the rest of us.
Let me tell you about business, and a law that's not on the books called the Law of Unintended Consequences. And I would take you back to 1947 or about that time, where technology was developed to aim cannons on tanks. And the concept behind the technology is the more data you got into the computer, the more you could aim the tank and hit a target. The next step for that technology was in supermarkets, where they used the technology basically to see what was on the shelf so they could restock the shelf. And then somebody figured out what's the next way you use that, and now here's where the law of unintended consequences came in. It wasn't a question of figuring out what was on the shelf. It was a question of figuring out who was picking the material up off the shelf and what we could learn about the consumer. So the barcode on everything you buy in the market, the purpose of it ultimately is not to track what's on the shelf, but to track you. Right. That's what it's there for. That's how it evolved. It started initially the way I told you. It evolved in the steps that I gave to you. So it's really not a question about the technology. It's I think what you said before. It's what we want to use it for. It's there. It's naive to believe it's not there, and it's very sophisticated. It's about our values and what we want to accomplish in society, and that we participate in the decisions which affect our lives.
Thank you. Let me suggest, let's take several comments or questions from the audience, and then let's have a quick concluding round from the panel. Ma'am.
I have a question that's related to the question that was asked previously just now. We're engaging in these kind of debates in this room and in policy circles, et cetera, and I'm wondering, in your opinion, how well informed you think the average American is about these issues of civil liberties and the national ID card and all these debates that are happening, and what you think can be done to increase an understanding of what's going on so that the person knows how it will directly affect them.
I was trying to make the point earlier that I think this all precedes 9/11, and we've all been asleep at the switch for a long time in understanding how pervasive these issues are in terms of privacy, due process, equal protection, information and the like. And I think there's a huge role here for the media to play in identifying and skeptically looking at exactly how much the world has changed. Chase Manhattan Bank knows a lot more about you than your government. And your healthcare provider probably knows a lot more about you than Chase Manhattan Bank. These are important and significant issues unrelated to 9/11 that we as Americans are not engaged with. They're difficult issues, they're intractable issues. DNA is another issue. All sorts of ethical implications. We have a very sophisticated DNA database. It's almost scientifically perfect, but it only applies to those who have been involved in the criminal justice system. There's a huge racial bias in that sample. What do we think about that as Americans?
What do you think Thomas Jefferson would think about his life being explored 200 years after his death by virtue of his DNA? I mean, what do you think he would say if he were here today to comment?
He'd say, I'm not going to be president.
How would you suggest that we as citizens proceed now to reestablish the liberty that has been hastily taken away by the Patriot Act?
Let's hold off on that answer and get a couple more comments.
Mr. Berman would like to start.
Okay, well, it kind of links into that question, actually. It's more for Mr. Jackson and Mr. Wharton, because I think I know where Mr. Berman stands. But obviously, at some level, you do need like oversight, and you need debate, as both of you gentlemen have said, that you do need a debate about these things and need to figure out what the playoffs are. But my question is, in terms of like the political climate, yes, we're more aware of like security and things. You said we've been asleep at the wheel, and this has taken people by surprise, and so that aspect of the debate has been kind of catapulted into the spotlight. But my question is, do you think that the political consequences of like our state of warfare, basically, we're in war in Afghanistan, probably going to be in war in Iraq, what impact do you think that is going to have on the political debate? And do you worry in the future that it might stifle the kind of debates that we're having now? Because, I mean, to link this back to Big Brother, and I hope I haven't misremembered my Orwell, but in 1984, part of the system was the constant state of warfare, right, undermining domestic criticism. So I'd like to put that to you two gentlemen and see if you, even that's not a worry now, whether it could become a worry.
Let's get two more from the floor, and then let's go around the panel and have everybody respond.
Yeah, my question is that as we navigate between civil liberties and security, it seems like a lot of the regulations have been coming out of the Justice Department and the executive branch of government. The Bush administration had been accused of acting unilaterally internationally in the past. And are they now acting unilaterally domestically? And is that for good or for worse?
One more from the floor.
My name is Natasha Krasnov. My question is mostly to Mr. Wharton. You have mentioned the fact that you can walk around and go into most buildings in Midtown without having to show your ID or anything, and that some companies now will put a table out checking. What I wanted to bring up is the fact that it's not just the identification that we worry about, it's identifying people who want to do something bad. And isn't it true, in fact, that the people that were on those planes on September 11th had to be identified before they got on the planes? And it is the link between the ill will and and personal identification that we were missing, and how can we go about actually establishing that link?
Let's let these last two folks who've been standing patiently, and then we can go to the panel.
One thing that I think is missing from this debate is the fact that there was a breakdown in the intelligence community. So how come the government should be allowed to collect more information when they haven't been able to do anything to protect us with what they've already got?
Good question.
I think I asked that.
One last question, and then let's go around.
This question is also for Mr. Wharton. Talking about security, as you say, if you put on a jacket, you can hide anything. All it's going to take is one bombing similar to what we have in Israel, and a theater or a public place, and everybody's going to be clamoring, we're not doing enough, we're not doing enough. Well, I commute from Brooklyn. Are you going to search me on the way to the F train? Are you going to search me when I go into the grocery store? I think that it's inevitable that we cannot supply that level of security, and it turns back to what the lady before me said. It turns to intent, and it turns then to searching what my thoughts are and coming back to saying this person is the one that we want to search, and then it turns into thought control, because you're going to be saying these people believe a certain way. We can collect that information through the laws we've already passed. We cause enough trouble for them by searching them often enough. They won't have a job. They won't get to work on time. And pretty soon, you don't go to those meetings. You don't make those discussions. I think that's the slippery slope we have. We can't be secure, I believe, and I'd like your comments on that.
Okay, in this order, Jeff.
I'm not suggesting I have the answer, but let me tell you how a terrorist is effective. They make you afraid of everything you do in your life that's routine by constantly changing the rules of engagement, and you don't change. The rules of engagement change every day. So as I said before, in Israel, it was the first floor, it's the third floor. It is a plane, it could be a car, it could be the tunnel, it could be a train. I'm not suggesting the answer. I'm merely posing the question, and we will decide based upon how this war on terrorism evolves and how much it affects our lives, what we're willing to tolerate to provide a safer and secure society. And we won't know that until we go further down the road. And I share the view that we have been unpredictably fortunate in the last 7 months that nothing else has happened. And I suggest we're in the eye of the hurricane, and when we are on the other side of it and something happens again, we will be faced with the most horrible decisions in society is where we want to place the rules. And I'm not suggesting the answer, I'm merely posing the question.
Thank you. Larry?
4 quick observations. I think this kind of discussion is the basic business of democracy, and we need to encourage more of it. Secondly, we're a very binary culture. We have a very short attention span, and I'm afraid that we'll lose interest. I don't think our leaders are venal enough to ever sustain war to distract attention from domestic politics. I think we have enough safeguards to ensure that doesn't occur, but I think the greater danger is that once we, quote unquote, win a war, we'll go back to business as usual. Third, Joe Nye has a new book out called The Paradox of American Power. America is the strongest society since the Roman Empire, but curiously, it can't go it alone. And in fact, the more it acts unilaterally, the weaker it becomes. And I think the observation that American exceptionalism and American unilateralism is exercised not only in our global and foreign policy, but also at home, is an interesting observation and one that's worth dwelling on. Finally, it's our government, as Jeff said earlier, and it has been entrusted, for lack of anyone else to entrust, with enormous power and authority. I think it needs to use this power and authority very vigorously, very wisely, and the press and others have a very important role in ensuring that it doesn't abuse that authority. And the concerns that Jerry has raised repeatedly will lead, if he's right, and if government is now abusing that authority or not needing that authority, it will lead to another binary reaction, which will lead to the law of unintended consequences kicking in yet again. So this is our time, it's our set of issues, and I think we need to make sure that our government acts responsibly.
I think that this is a watershed time, and it's important that these issues be covered in the media. It's important that citizens, even if you don't understand all of the dimensions, if you care about the privacy balance, raise it with your member of Congress, because right now they are just terrified of doing anything that might, if it goes wrong, is going to, you know, if a terrorist attack, they're going to be blamed for it, and they're going to be thrown out of office. They need some backbone. The other thing that I worry about particularly in the ID card and issues like that, where you say all we need to do is identify people at airports, and then it begins, you say, well, what about deadbeat dads, and then there are crooks, and then there are what information goes into it, and it begins to become a large, potentially very intrusive technology. And I come back to terrorists. This was a very different kind of terrorist act. Terrorism really thrives on trying to undermine the legitimacy of the government by taking acts that make it overreact and undermine the legitimacy within a community. No one could say that this was an act of war, because it didn't build any sympathy from anybody for anything, except maybe in the Muslim community. But if our government overreacts over a period of time and raises doubts about its commitment to open society, or creates things that chill speech or privacy, without laying a justification for it, it will play to, that's what terrorists really love. That's their aim, and if they undermine our commitment to open society, they really will have won. And we just can't give them that victory. And I spent all day, last point, working with the National Security Council on, I'm not a we, they. We are trying to yell and scream at each other at a certain point, but we are trying to work together to try and develop a national strategy that addresses open society issues as well as national security. So the debate goes on, participate, at least express your concern, and the press can do an awful lot.
And thank you all for participating.
That's good.